Greetings, my dear friends. This is Commander Chakrapani or Chax with yet another episode of Chax Simplifies. For a while now, I have been generally talking about the external situation as far as India is concerned and predominantly focusing on the geopolitics of areas around India. This time, let's take a look at what is happening within the country. You must understand, whatever happens outside the country has a bearing on the internal situation of the country as well as vice versa. Of late, numerous very curious incidents have happened in India for which there is no logical explanation if they are taken one at a time. But if you string them along together, the story they paint is quite different. The COVID and the Wuhan virus has had a profound effect on India, especially on the internal landscape of India, changing not just the dynamics of the economics, but also the political life and the life in general of all Indian citizens. When one takes up or you list out the internal challenges of India, the usual suspects would be Corona or COVID or the Wuhan virus, its aftermath, the second wave, the healthcare system in the country, the vaccination, the economy, unemployment, poverty, China, Pakistan, and the stability on our borders, and so on. However, I would like to take a step back and look at more conceptual problems, issues that India is facing and will face in 2021 and beyond. Welcome, dear friends, to Chax Simplifies, your channel to demystify and simplify complex issues. I, your host, am Commander Chakrapani or Chax for short. In this episode, we will look at the emerging challenges as far as India is concerned internally and how they connect with our external situation as it exists today. The internal situation and the external situation as far as the country is concerned, and let's focus on India now, are two faces of the same coin. Intrinsically connected and flow from the geopolitical reality of India. Please do view my previous video on the external issues to get the other side of the coin while we continue focusing on the internal issue. I would like to suggest that the five major internal challenges that India is facing today are: the first, the foreign hand. A very oft misused saying coined at some time by the then Prime Minister of India, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, who saw a foreign hand and outside influence on almost everything. Yes, this foreign hand is visible today also. Of late, the old structure in India, the old structures are crumbling. New ones are taking their place. This situation of flux is always one which has its own intrinsic problems, and this finds its echo in India's internal issues as well. Democracy, especially the absence of a viable opposition, is the third issue that India faces. Social issues and how they are causing a degradation whether in the society, whether on communal lines or political lines. And lastly, the absence of a mature, unbiased media. Let's take one by one and go ahead. Let's take a very quick look before we delve into the internal situation on what is happening outside of India. Don't forget, in the last couple of weeks, both China and Pakistan have expressed a desire for peace with India. Why have they suddenly got this enthusiasm for peace? Well, there are reasons for that, and let's take them, these countries, one by one. Let's take the easy one, Pakistan, the first. Pakistan is in dire straits. Economically, its foreign exchange reserves won't even last 2 weeks of imports. Lots of internal issues which are snowballing rapidly. The opposition in Pakistan is gaining strength day by day. Balochistan is getting more and more restive, with Baloch fighters actually waylaying Pakistani troops in multiple locations and causing significant damage both to the morale as well as the internal situation of Pakistan. The absence of corona vaccine and Pakistan's inability to procure this vaccine from anywhere. The CEPC is not delivering the results that were expected from it. The CPEC has in many ways failed Pakistan. The FATF sword continues to hang. Pakistan is still in the grey list, and no one knows when it will land up in the blacklist. There is great uncertainty about what is happening in Pakistan's backyard, Afghanistan. It tried its best to keep India out of the peace process in Afghanistan. That has not happened. India has been invited there. Taliban is showing greater resilience and the will to keep Pakistan out. And there are talks which are going on between the Taliban and the government of Afghanistan, though these talks have not progressed greatly. Take China. China is smarting. The withdrawal of its troops from the finger areas of the Pangong Tso Lake, a major loss of force, the first time Chinese have physically withdrawn since Vietnam, and that was way back in the 1970s. The sale of BrahMos to Philippines is on the way, and Philippines has found new belligerents with respect to the Chinese vessels that are occupying some of the shoals which are within the Philippine territory, exclusive economic zone. The relocation of manufacturing out of China, especially the supply chain, with the Quad countries, with particular emphasis on Japan, which is actually funding this relocation, is causing great distress. Vaccine diplomacy of China doesn't seem to be working. Countries are not too happy with the vaccines that Chinese have been making, and they are not accepting the bullying tactics of China. Through its mouthpiece, the Global Times, China has been trying to discredit Indian vaccines so that it can repitch its vaccine diplomacy. The recent meeting in Alaska between the foreign ministers of the US and China has not gone on quite well. And of late, the UN suddenly seems to have found some spine and has been asking for unfettered access to see what is happening with the Uyghurs. Tedros, the WHO chief, has not ruled out the Wuhan virus having coming out from a lab at Wuhan in China. Quad is a reality. Very recently, a virtual summit meeting of the Quad took place, and the joint op-ed released by the four leaders said their partnership was a spark of hope to light the path ahead in the darkness brought about by the COVID-19 partnership. 1 billion doses of vaccine by the end of 2021 would be rolled out using the US technology Indian manufacturing, Japanese finance, and Australian supply chain. The Indo-Pacific is accessible and dynamic, governed by international law and bedrock principles such as freedom of navigation, freedom of peaceful resolution of disputes to allow countries to make choices free of coercion. And they set up working groups on climate change, high-tech areas, and supply chain. The last two of particular anguish to China. Although China was never been named, the focus is clear. France, Britain are actively looking to join the Quad Plus. Germany is waiting in the wings. So let's now, with that as a background, see what is happening inside the country. You would recollect I spoke about some pointers, some incidents isolated at the basic level, but seem to be quite interconnected. Let's take them. Let's look at a long list. I'm just taking an indicative list here. We had inordinate delays in the commissioning of the Kondakulam nuclear power plant, caused significantly by local agitation which seemed to be funded from outside. The closing down of the Sterlite copper plant in Tamil Nadu, India, from being a large producer, became a large importer. And surprise, surprise, Chinese satellite Pakistan came up with a copper plant near Karachi. The anti-CAA protests, thereafter the farm laws, the protests that happened against the farm laws by farmers or so-called farmers who seem to have got funding and support from outside. The inexplainable sudden unrest in the Winstron plant in Karnataka, which was vandalized. That's the plant that makes the Apple iPhones. A mysterious fire took place in the Serum Institute just as India was rolling out its vaccine diplomacy. The Bhima Koregaon protests, which happens regularly every year, suddenly went on a different tangent. They became violent and widespread. The Rohingyas managed to find refuge in places as far away as Jammu, Hyderabad, further south. How did they ever manage to reach there without active support from inside? The Kerala gold smuggling case, which has its tentacles spread allegedly all the way up to the chief minister and the local government, no surprises, is resisting central investigation. Just recently, certain non-issues like the perception of India's democracy of not being free by the Freedom House report, or the Greta's toolkit, Rehana's tweet, etc., and the excessive coverage given to the fact that Ever Given, the ship that got itself stranded in the Suez Canal, was entirely Indian. How does the crew make a difference? Yet, this got significant coverage across the globe in a way or a reason to malign India. Each of the above have some common threads. They seem to be sponsored by faceless people and organizations. Funds coming from inexplainable sources, generally from outside. The role of organizations like the Popular Front of India, the PFI, and some political parties are suspect. Indian prestige across the globe is getting affected by such activities. And there is a concentrated effort being made to project India as not such a good choice, not a popular destination for any FDI. right? Yet, one must understand nothing from outside is possible unless there is something internal somewhere we are making our mistakes. So that's the first problem that I can see. Don't forget, India's old structures were built and conceived by Prime Minister Nehru, and broadly his stature, his respect was so much that not many people, really speaking, differed. It was essentially continued the same feudal structure which was set up by the British, wherein God is government, government is God. Essentially, the government of India replaced the government of Britain. Primarily left leaning and believed in centralized direction, something that Nehru was very impressed with as far as the Soviet Union or the then Soviet Union was concerned. It was controlled by the bureaucracy. Education, religious institutions, economy, media were all nudged by issued by grants given by the government or privileges or access. The personality of Pandit Nehru actually dwarfed everything else, and the hegemony of the Congress grew as time went by. India's rate of growth, economic development suffered, not surprisingly, and it was called very derisively as the Hindu rate of growth. Don't forget, the partition of India was a very painful process, genuinely very painful process. Lakhs of people died in it. More lakhs were rendered homeless. Therefore, in some form, perhaps to ensure the wounds of partitions were not reopened, some of the history of India was papered over and given a glossy finish. Whether it was by design or by default is something one needs to examine. Caste-based reservations came into being, initially envisaged only for 10 years, but no party today can dare to take them away. They are only growing, and more people actually wanting to say, hey, we are backward. I would have thought people want to go forward, but here in India, we clamor to go backwards. This definitely, along with the adjustment, if you will, for want of a better word, to cater for sensibilities of the people, the adjustment of history, has created certain amount of disquiet within the large majority of India, which is the Hindus. While Congress was in power, this structure more or less held. Secularism was interpreted as anti-Hindu and pro-minority. The absence of social media, access to information helped promote this kind of a feeling. However, with the growth of the predominantly Hindu party, the Bharatiya Janata Party has led to the questioning of many of these policies and the way history has been written. Naturally, when this happens, there is conflict. This conflict is possibly among the major underlying cause for many of the internal caste and religion-based tensions. The establishment of a new order in India is in progress. Its contours will determine how the country will progress as times go by. We have our own social issues. There is overt communalism, over politicalization of almost everything that's happening in India. The social fabric seems to be in a mess. The society divided on religious lines, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Christian, and so on. Basis of caste, Dalit, other backward castes, OBCs, you name it. Region, Bengal pride, Tamil pride, the Khalsa pride or the Sikh pride, the Malayali, the North versus South, insider versus outsider, and every election throws up more muck. Selective outrage is visible across the board where condemnation is dependent on who has done what, which region, which state, the political party who's ruling that region or state comes into the picture, the leanings and the personality, especially of the media, and don't forget, social media is not far behind. For example, an azan from a mosque all day round is considered perfectly fine, but ringing of bells in a temple is not kosher. This becomes the reason for extreme views and calls for freedom in peril. Almost everything is looked upon with politically tinted lens. Political parties, all of them virtually, look at voters as vote banks. Let's sample some promises that have been made in recent elections. Some parties have promised reservation based on religion, something which is not permitted by the Constitution of India. Some parties, states like Tamil Nadu, want reservations to go beyond the 50%, which the Supreme Court laid down as the limit. Some parties promise washing machines, digital tablets, and yes, even a free robo to clean up your house as a part of the poll promises. Elect me and I'll give you this. Lakhs of government jobs have been promised. Repealing of laws like the CAA, waiver of loans, etc., also have been promised by various political parties at various locations. Political parties today, especially those in the opposition, welcome even the smallest critique from even small time organizations across the globe so that they can project or paint India in bad light. Take, for example, a US based NGO, Freedom House, called India partially free based on some findings which it has without too much research. A Sweden based Varieties of Democracy Institute calls India an electoral autocracy. One senator writes to the Secretary of Defense, and that becomes an issue in India. Does really India need certificates from the West? Is our democracy so flawed that we can't resolve it at home? These acts make India appear soft and vulnerable. And don't forget, Chinese propaganda or Chinese design, when it says war or from any means, one of them is to use the country's own systems against that same country. Is there a foreign hand back here? Democracy, is it really in danger? Well, in my opinion, not. However, there is a reasonable fear that we do not have a viable opposition. One view is it is not the ruling party's business to ensure there is a viable opposition, and if the opposition parties cannot get their house in order, what can one do? Very true. Yet, the absence of a viable opposition is not such a great thing. I would go to the extent of saying the UPA one delivered results essentially because it had a strong opposition, the BJP, and the left parties in significant number could ensure the UPA did not deviate from the common minimum program. However, UPA 2 went berserk as far as scams and everything which means non-governance went. The impression today is all opposition parties are uniting together only to defeat one man, one party. Not the best idea. They are forgetting their basic ideology, their differences, just for one purpose. And once they get that purpose, what will happen to them? The Janata Dal government, not so far back, is one such example, and a painful one at that. Desperation is driving political parties. You have the Congress aligning itself with the far right, the ISF, led by the Farfara Sharif influential cleric Abbas Siddiqui. To the far left, the CPM coming together with the aim of defeating BJP and Modi in Bengal. Program policies originally conceived, for example, the Aadhaar by the UPA, were taken over brilliantly, one would say, by the BJP to ensure direct benefit transfer happens. Instead of praising and accepting that yes, the BJP has done well, the Congress now has problems with Aadhaar. How much more ridiculous can one get? Electoral debacles have made people, parties, even more desperate. Let's take the example of the farm laws. All economists across party lines say that these laws are good. Each of the political parties at some point in time in the last 15 years were in favor of that. These laws were very much in the manifesto of the Congress in 2019. The Montek Singh Ahluwalia Commission, appointed by the government of Punjab by Amrinder Singh, had these laws also. Farmer leaders like the same Tikait were in favor when the ordinance was passed in 2020, yet came out totally against it subsequently. Funding is coming from very questionable sources in Canada, US and the UK, with leaders with Khalistani leanings. The 26 Jan 2021 incident is a blot as far as India is concerned. One pop star tweets, a Greta sends out a toolkit, and how does this all come together? There is significant amount of disinformation, half-truths and canards spread by vested interests, and this has been the norm. Similar is the case of the CAA and the NRC. Don't forget, the NRC was introduced by much fanfare by UPA 2, with the then President of India, the first citizen to be enrolled in the National Population Register. The same party today is dead set against it. The BJP, like I said, was against Aadhaar till it came in power and realized the power of Aadhaar and implemented it with great gusto to the extent that leakages across the board have come down. The doing away of the middleman seems to be among the central promises that the BJP is implementing, along with development of infrastructure. Yet, politicians, political parties are coming together with their own narrow agendas, points of view, and their brand of politics. The recent court verdicts on cases like the Israt Jahan, indicating political leaders have put their political requirements above India's own security. Let's take the case of media now. Democracy needs checks and balances. One is the opposition. The other big is the media, a mature, unbiased and free media. In India, most medias is controlled or owned by large for-profit organizations and corporations which reap revenue from advertising, subscription and sale of copyright material. One large source of advertisements is the government of the country, government of India and the state governments. As on 31st March 2018, there were over 1 lakh publications registered with the Registrar of Newspapers in India. So, is the Indian media really free and unbiased? Some facts first. The Global Media Index ranks India a lowly 142 out of 182. Is that the reality? The media, in my opinion, seems to be indulging in open politicking and taking sides. It is quite abusive of individual privacy. Witness the case of the media coverage of the Sushant Singh Rajput case and the hounding of some of the personalities there. Openly contributing in spreading of fake news and giving communal angle to everything. Remember, Rajdeep Sardesai was very recently pulled up by his own media house. The same news in different channels is reported differently, based entirely on the point of view of the media house. The maturity of Indian media is definitely suspect. Many will remember the comment made by the terrorists who attacked us in the Taj on our own 26/11. They will remember the comment, "We got the latest on Indian security forces from NDTV." TRP hunting, breaking news syndromes leads media houses at times of reasonably often to junk norms to get a sensational angle first. Noted respected journalists have been censured. Take the cases of the TRP fake news, Rajdeep Sardesai himself, Arnab Goswami coming under the TRP scam. Well, heavy-handed coverage, I spoke about the Sushant Singh Rajput case, and demands for regulation of media have been there for a long time. The Indian media is largely self-regulated. There is a Press Council of India, a statutory body, and the News Broadcasting Standards Authority, a self-regulatory organization that sets standards more in the form of guidelines. There is a program and advertisement code for regulating content broadcast on the TV issued under the Cable Television Networks Regulation Act 1995. Sadly, despite self-regulation, numerous guidelines, the mainstream media is not really delivered. These guidelines have been ineffective, essentially, in my opinion, because the regulatory bodies lack teeth to implement them. Social media is a new entity, probably the biggest challenge. Fake news is probably central to many mob lynchings, unrest across the country. Sadly, people seem to believe social media much more than the mainstream media. Digital media and the OTT over-the-top platforms have absolutely free, unregulated, and no action can be taken against the violators because most of these platforms operate from outside the country. To address this, in the February 2021, the government notified the Information Technology Guidelines for Intermediaries and Digital Media Ethics Code, Rules 2021. The impact of this has not been measured, but the reaction from media houses and OTT platforms has been mixed. So, where do we go from here? How will India move forward? Will India go by the philosophy of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas and Sabka Vishwas? Will we have liberalized form of governance, or would we go the controlled economy way? The return to the license quota Raj of India's past. Don't forget, it is this attitude of license quota Raj and the government knows it all that still limits our economy. Will our education system continue to throw up sahibs, people who feel they are educated and cannot work with their own hands and do not understand the value or the dignity of labor, or create citizens who are willing to take things in their own hands, work and deliver? Will we lay emphasis on catching up with the rest of the world technologically, technically, educationally, economically, participate and indeed come out leaders in the second industrial revolution with key technologies like AI, blockchain, automation, machine learning, and the works? Or will we let political expediency drive the narrative in India? Will we move quickly enough to fill the gap created by the disruption in the supply chains and manufacturing in China, or let bureaucratic hurdles stymie us once again? So, gentlemen, we continue to live in very interesting times. India's position in the new world order will depend on how India takes up and addresses these very challenges that I enumerated in the past few minutes. As always, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and if you have not already subscribed, and press the bell icon to be notified of new videos. Please feel free to share my video with your friends. Knowledge grows when shared. I look forward to your comments and suggestions. Until next time, Jai Hind.